Working in the round can allow you to create flat circular pieces, which is often used to start amigurumi pieces or a top-down hat, or maybe you're making coasters or a rug, a placemat. And then you can also work in the round creating tubes or cylinders, and that might be used to make a nice cowl, cuff down socks, band up hat. Often you might start with a flat circular piece which becomes a tube, and that's actually how a lot of amigurumi pieces work. It's also how you create a hat or a ball or basket. There's probably a million things you could create. There are several small choices you can make while working in the round that will actually alter the appearance of what you're making. I'm going to show you a few different options at the different stages. It's actually good to know these options. You might come across a pattern that doesn't quite make sense because it's not the way you're used to working in the round. Nobody likes to be taken by surprise. Boo, boo. I love hearing if I've been able to help anyone at any level. So if you learned something new from this video, please leave me a comment and let me know. Also, if there are any basic techniques that are unfamiliar to you that I use to create all these round things, I also have a stitch library available in a playlist or a complete video of all the crochet basics. So see if you can find it. No, I'll leave links. There are actually a couple of ways to start creating a flat circle in the round where you work from the center out. One method is to create a loop by using chains and then working into that circle. The other method is the magic ring, which will allow you to actually pull the ring quite tight and close, unless it's got too many stitches in there. Let's start with the magic ring, shall we?
This is how I do it. I believe there are several other techniques, however when I learned this was the only way that really stuck with me. I have a detailed video on the magic ring available too. Once you have the ring, you can start working stitches into it and then pull it closed when you finish the first round. If you want the centre to remain slightly open, you would use a number of chains to start your circle.
The number of chains you start with will actually depend on how big you want that centre circle to be. The stitches of your first row and may actually change depending on the size of your hook and your yarn. What I'm saying is there may be some trial and error involved in working out how many chains to use, unless you're working from a pattern, of course.
I'll just quickly show you 6 chains joined with a slip stitch to create a ring, and then work a few stitches in there.
To start a hollow tube piece, you'll need to chain the amount of stitches you need to get the full circumference, and then slip stitch the end of the chain together to start then working in the round. Now you also want to make sure that chain doesn't twist, because you will notice that in the work, and you might find it tricky to work into a twisted chain as well.
This is a little hack for ensuring your chain won't twist, especially if it needs to be quite long. Chain about 5, then remove your hook, insert it into the top of the first chain, then bring it round to the right before reinserting it into the last chain you did in the exact same direction, so you can continue working on the chain. Then, when you completed all your chains, you can join the 2 ends by slip stitching straight into the last and first chain, which is already on your hook. No twists, see?
An alternative might be to use a foundation round as your first row instead of chaining and then working into that. I have some short videos on the foundation rounds if you want to check those out and learn how to do it. Links in the description. And if you use this method, you might want to just keep your starting tail long enough to neaten up the bottom when you're done. A little tip there. Okay, once you're on your way to working in the round, there are actually a few different ways that you can join in the round. Usually involving slip stitches, but where you put them and where you put the first stitch of the round can change how it looks and give you a different outcome in the work. So I'll show you each of the joining methods and then we'll compare them all together. The first join is no join. Amigurumi pieces are usually worked in a spiral where you work continually in the round.
Working in a spiral, you don't need to close off each round. I definitely suggest using a stitch marker, especially if you're counting stitches as you go. This method also only really works for short stitches like single crochets, and you'll definitely run into trouble trying to use it for double crochets, etc.
The next 3 joining methods use slip stitches and chains, which is very useful if you need to create a bit of height before you start your first stitch, say if you're working in double crochet or treble crochet.
There are two methods where the chains at the beginning of each round are counted as stitches. The most common would probably be where you join each round by slip stitching into the top of the previous starting chain to close each round. Work your chains and count them as the first stitch, and then continue working around. Work your last stitch into the last stitch of the previous round. And slip stitch into the top of the chain. Method 2 is where you also count the chains as your first stitch, but it varies slightly. You actually close the round by slip stitching into the top of the first real stitch rather than the top of the chain. But to keep your stitch count the same, you will actually work your final stitch into the slip stitch of the previous round. What I really like about this method is that it facilitates an invisible finish quite well. Then method 3 is where you don't count the chain at the beginning of each round as a stitch. To accomplish this, you want your chains to sit slightly shorter than the first stitches. For example, if you're working double crochets, you would do 3 chains if you were to count them as a stitch, but only 2 if you don't. Now, because we're not counting the chain in this method, you'll also have to work the first stitch into the same stitch as your chains. Your last stitch will then go into the last stitch of the previous round, and you ignore the slip stitch and chain, to close off by slip stitching into the first stitch of the round. Now, if we look at the result of each method side by side, you'll notice the slight differences. Method 1, where we've counted the chain as a stitch and joined to the top of the chain at the end of each round, can get quite gappy and is very noticeable. For method 2, where we've counted the chain as a stitch but joined to the first stitch and worked our last stitch into the slip stitch, if you can see it, you'll notice that the placement of the joins do curve. However, I think they're quite camouflaged or harder to spot. For method 3, where you don't count the chain, work your first stitch into the same space as the chain and slip stitch into the top of the first stitch. The joins are really obvious, but they are in a straight line in a flat circle. They do actually start to go ever so slightly on the diagonal when working on a tube without increases.
Let me know in the comments which method you think works up best or looks nicest. I really like how hidden the joins are of method 2, but of course they are travelling along the work as you go around, so you need to be mindful of that because your starting point in the round will actually shift along the way. For all the joins I've showed you, we have been working around in the same direction as we go, but of course you are able to turn your work and work back the other way in the round if you choose, and it will give your work a slightly different look.
In theory, you can use any of the joining methods if you're turning your work in the round, but I recommend not counting the chain as a stitch, as in method 3.
The final thing I want to talk about is increasing and decreasing in the round, particularly as we use increases to create that flat circle and then decreases to close off, say, a ball or a doll's head or whatever it might be.
Increases are simply 2 stitches worked into one, and decreases are working 2 stitches together. I have videos on these too. To create an even circle, each round will increase by the number of stitches you started with. So if you've started with 6 stitches, the next round will have 12, then 18, then 24, then 30, etc, etc. Now, you can place each increase on top of the previous row increase, which would be done by second round, increase into each stitch, third round, work 1, increase all the way around, fourth round, work 2, increase all the way around, Next round, work 3, increase all the way around, etc. But it doesn't actually create a nice circular shape. In this case, it's more of a hexagon. To create an actual circle, you'll want to stagger your increases round to round. They're still worked evenly within each round, but they're not sitting on top of each other. So after the second round, which is all increases, I like to work my rounds as follows. Third round, increase, work 1. Fourth round, work 1, increase, work 1, all the way around. So there are still 2 stitches between each increase, but they won't be sitting right on top of the previous round's increases. Fifth round, work 3, increase all the way around. Sixth round, work 2, increase, work 2 all the way around. So there are still 4 stitches between each increase. I generally place my decreases according to this count too. As soon as you stop increasing and just putting 1 stitch into a 1 stitch, your flat circle will start to curve. And from there you can create a closed off tube, say for a hat or a ball, etc. If you want the circle to remain flat to create a base for, say, a basket, when you stop increasing, your first round should be worked into the back loops only to create a sharper curve.
You can of course increase or decrease to change the shape of a tube piece that you're working on too. I almost called this piece everything you need to know about working in the round. Then I realised that that might just be an impossible video to make and I would be bound to miss something. If you've got any other hacks for working in the round, please let me know in the comments. It'll be great to know. And of course other people can read the comments too. We can all learn together. Please like this video if you found it helpful or entertaining or both. And subscribe to my channel if you don't want to miss any content. There's a bell thing too. What's with the bell? Hey, take care and I'll see you soon.